Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to those who are joining us a little bit earlier. Our session today is on technologies for niche, indigenous and underutilized crops to support smallholder farmers with both food and nutrition security and climate resilience. So this particular session is mainly between a collaboration between the Department of Science and Technology of South Africa and N8 Food System Policy Hub in the UK. The program is supported by the British High Commission, and the collaboration is mainly aimed at enabling innovations in food security through identifying opportunities to better support and coordinate a sustainable agri-food system and generate evidence for policy making. So we'll start off with our speakers. The first one in line is Professor Bob Doherty, Director of N8 Food, Agri-Food Food System Policy Hub, University of York. He will be talking about the background on the collaboration between DSI and N8. Over to you, Prof. Doherty.
Thanks, Yelisa, and good afternoon, actually, to the Science Forum in South Africa. I'm really pleased to just give you a bit of an introduction to the collaboration. And I'm Bob Doherty, as Yelisa said, based at the University of York, working on food systems. And N8 Agri-Food actually is a collaboration of all 8 universities in the north of England, from York, Durham, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, etc., all working on food systems. And we came together in 2015 as a collaboration, working not only in the UK, but working in geographical areas like sub-Saharan Africa, really on food systems, resilience and sustainability. And for about 6 months now, we've been working on food policy with our partners in South Africa in a collaboration with the great team at the British High Commission, the great team at the Department of Science and Innovation, and really identifying via several roundtables exactly topics that we can work on together in knowledge exchange, working both ways, and showcasing some of the research that we've already been working on internationally as an N8 consortia across the north of England. And the 3 topics we've actually identified as key topics that where we can work together and learn from each other in this international collaboration is climate resilience, particularly with smallholders, which we're going to talk about today. And we've got 3 amazing speakers, agriculture and trade. How can we use technology between the 2 nations of the UK and South Africa to enhance trade, and policy making in food systems? So the Science Forum event today is really showcasing that first theme that we want to work on, which is climate resilience, particularly with smallholders. And I'm really excited about this collaboration. It brings resources together, and we should be going forward in the future really identifying opportunities for joint funding where we can really scale up the insights on these particular topics. So that's enough from me. I'm really looking forward to the speakers, and I just really like this collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bob. We'll go on to our next speaker. Her name is Professor Catherine Denby. Professor Denby is a member of the Center for Novel Agricultural Products in the University of York. Her research focuses on plant disease resistance, novel biological control strategies, and crop improvement for disease resistance, yield and quality traits. Professor Denby work is focused on leafy vegetables using large-scale data and new plant breeding techniques to meet the needs of the UK and global South agriculture and new production systems. Prof. Denby, over to you.
Right, thank you, Lisa. I'll try and share my screen. Can you see that? Is that all okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. It's a pleasure to speak at this Science Forum. And as Yelisa was saying, I'm from the University of York. And I'm going to talk to you about a project that we've been had the privilege of working on with a number of partners about looking how we harness the benefits of traditional crops for enhanced nutrition, livelihoods and climate resilience of smallholder farmer agriculture in Southern Africa. So the first point I wanted to stress was really that partnership is essential. In the work that I'm going to put, it's a very short presentation of the work today, but we've had a number of partners. We've got Northwest University and the ARC in South Africa, along with the Cassava Trust, World Vegetable Centre based in Taiwan, Ghent and the University of York in Europe. And then also we've had a great partnership with the African Orphan Crops Consortium, which is based or run out of the University of UC Davis. And it takes time to develop these strong relationships and these strong partnerships. And I think that's one of my sort of first points, is that it's very hard to develop these strong partnerships with short-term sort of funding, and our government's as guilty of it as anyone else. But it's just it is really, you get a great partnership going, and we need to sort of make sure that we nurture these strong and successful partnerships. The other thing I wanted to point out is not just that we've got diverse geography of partners, but as you'll see during the presentation, we've got a real diversity of both the type of organisation, but also the expertise and capacity of partners. And it's that collaboration across expertise and capacity that really has been made success. So what the crop that I'm going to talk about today is Amaranthus or Amaranth. And hopefully show you how it's got potential to meet several of the Sustainable Development Goals, and highlight a bit of what the challenges are going forwards. So as I'm sure many of you know, amaranths are a traditional crop, and neglected in the sense of understudied compared to, say, the key crops that are giving staple crops. It's eaten widely across sub-Saharan Africa, but typically not cultivated. There are, particularly in Kenya, I would say at the moment, a lot of initiatives to cultivate amaranth, but mostly it's eaten from wild harvesting. So the thing that makes these amaranths so special is that they, like many leafy vegetables, are particularly rich in vitamins and minerals. And amaranths also got quite high levels of protein in the leaves, particularly lysine, or containing lysine, which is obviously an amino acid that we need to get from our diets. Also, these plants do C4 photosynthesis, which all you need to know about that is that this helps confer drought tolerance on these plants. And this is where the climate resilience comes in. These leafy amaranths are drought tolerant, and often can be still growing when other crops have failed. They're also hardy, they don't need a lot of inputs. And obviously, all those characteristics come together to make amaranths suitable for cultivation in smallholder farmer environments, and where we think they've got real potential, if cultivated, for enhancing nutrition, providing income as a leafy vegetable, and also providing climate resilience. And the main barrier to this cultivation is the lack of improved varieties. And when we say improved varieties, so amaranths are sort of semi-domesticated at best, and what we really need is some varieties that have improved yield and quality traits that are relevant for different agroecological zones, different areas with different rainfall and soil types, etc. And that's what we've been trying to do. So the aims of this project, which only started 3 years ago, was really to sort of to support the amaranth breeding program that was being run at the ARC, bringing in genomics and some molecular biology, metabolomics, which is measuring all the sort of metabolites, the compounds in the plants, to work with our partners to promote amaranth cultivation by smallholder farmers in South Africa. And obviously, we're also interested in some new biological discoveries. And the project has brought together various different disciplines and approaches, which are sort of highlighted on the right there. So we're combining the breeding and crop science expertise and social science expertise and physiology at ARC with our genomics and molecular biology capacity and expertise. So one of the first things we did was to generate a really high quality genome sequence for a species of Amaranthus cruentus. This is one of the main species of this plant. And this genome sequence will really be critical in trying to bring the molecular approaches in and trying to understand what genes in this crop are important in the beneficial traits. On the right hand side, all I'm showing you is that basically this is, we've compared this to the only other chromosome level genome assembly that's available at the moment in Amaranthus hypochondriacus. So these are the two genomes that we have to work with going forwards. And you'll see we've done a lot more genome information in our project, but these are really high quality genomes that are going to drive the use of genomic information in breeding. ARC had been collecting a diversity set of amaranth lines. You can see that these are of various different amaranth species. Some of them we don't know the species because amaranth is quite sort of difficult to, or often quite difficult to sort of determine the species from how it looks. And so what we've done over the last 3 years is grow these 90 different lines in irrigated field trials at ARC. And have captured a vast amount of data on the different agronomic traits of these different lines and how they differ. So I've just put a few things there around height, around obviously yield, how long it takes to flower, and so on. And then critically, we've also captured or harvested material from all these lines. And back in York, we've been measuring the metabolite, nutrient content, and also sequencing the genomes of all these different amaranth lines. So really getting to understand what is the variation within this diversity set, and then how can we best use it going forwards. So just to sort of highlight some of the things that we've been doing with the metabolite profiling. So the key questions we're asking are things like, what are the differences between these different amaranth lines in compounds important to nutrition? So things like flavonols, polyphenols, as well as the more usual vitamins and minerals. And critically, we're also asking, are these differences between lines robust over different years? So we're trying to assess, is there a genetic basis for the differences in the metabolites, or is it due to different environments? And you can see in the diagram on the right, it's just a heat map showing the level of different metabolites across these different lines. And you can see around the middle how there's some metabolites that differ across the 90 lines. And then we can combine this information on which metabolites are in which different lines with our genome assembly. And on the right, you've got a diagram where we've got several of these clusters in the genome, where we've got a number of different enzymes that are involved in making polyphenols, flavonols, different specialized metabolites. So we've got a number of different enzymes which are co-located in the genome, and that co-location is conserved across related species. So there we're looking at the 2 Amaranthus genomes, spinach, quinoa, and sugar beet. And so that gives us a clue that those enzymes are involved in the same pathway. So now we can start linking up the presence of metabolites in these different lines, the expression of these enzymes, and trying to work out what are the pathways for some of the metabolites that are important for nutrition. So you can see really adding value to the diversity set, and also enabling us to actually understand some of the mechanisms underlying the biology. The other thing we've been doing is with the World Vegetable Centre. So when we come to crop improvement, genetic variation is critical. So this is how gene sequence differs across different plants and how that impacts on a number of different traits. And we can use natural variation, or we can induce. And in this magic population, what the World Vegetable Centre have done has, rather than just crossing 2 lines and capturing the variation from 2 lines, they've crossed 8 different amaranth lines, actually across 2 different amaranth species. So we've got a magic population of 400 lines, which has captured the genetic variation from 8 different plants. And this is a really powerful resource to understanding the genetic basis of a number of different traits. The key to this is whether your parents of this population differ in the traits you're interested in. And so in the table on the left there, you can see the 8 parent lines have all got sort of different traits that would be useful for amaranth breeding program, whether it's yield, whether it's insect resistance, nutritional value, and so on. So these traits are captured in this magic population. So we've also at ARC, using the fantastic rainout shelter facilities, been looking at, we'll do these magic parent lines differ in traits to do with drought tolerance. So although amaranths are drought tolerant, they still can vary, and the yield and the nutritional content can vary depending on the water availability. So we carried out an experiment growing the 8 different parent lines under 4 different water regimes. So either 20, 40, 60, 80% depleted, and measured again a large number of different traits. And again, we've measured metabolite profiles to see whether they're impacted by water availability. So I'm just showing one trait in the plot here, where you can see this is the harvestable yield from each of the 8 lines. And you can see there's a couple of lines with very high yield under low water deficit, but you can see, particularly for the line in the middle, the yield drops off dramatically as water becomes more limiting. So these are the types of, if we can combine high yield with perhaps more of the drought resilience seen in other lines, you can see how we can start to improve amaranth varieties. So we know we've got variation in our magic population that's useful. So this year, we're just about to start growing this population, or 180 lines of this population, in field trials in different places in South Africa with different climatic and soil conditions. And then we'll integrate this trait information with the genomic sequence and variation to identify genome regions responsible for the beneficial traits. And ultimately, within the breeding program, we want to combine these regions to develop lines that have the good combination of these beneficial traits. The other thing I wanted to point out is that, community participation is vital. So this has been something that ARC and Northwest have been really, leading on and been a real eye-opener for me, and a really sort of satisfying way of different way of working. So we've been using participatory breeding with smallholder farmers in different locations. And I think Michael will tell a bit more about this. But the key thing is that, by engaging with the farmers, we're ensuring that the varieties that we go on to develop are actually going to be taken up by stakeholders throughout the food system. So the smallholder farmers can assess them not just in terms of growth and yield, but also in terms of harvesting and cooking and taste. And by selling to informal vendors, not only are they actually earning an income from these, but also those vendors are reflecting the local consumer sort of preferences. Will come back and ask for particular lines. The other aspect that's absolutely vital is providing the pull-through, providing a market, access to markets for these for amaranth.
Recording stopped.
So some of the challenges to amaranth cultivation, and hence, sort of benefits to the farmers, is that these amaranths are perishable as a leafy
Recording
vegetable.
in progress.
And the access to markets is difficult. And that's where we've worked with the Cassava Trust, who have really created a market demand with access agreements with local supermarkets, and by acting as a hub where farmers can bring their produce. And also Cassava Trust, together with ARC, have been involved in new product development. So by drying and milling our amaranth leaf, it can be used in a variety of different products, including the bread that ARC have developed down here, and health drinks. And with the Cassava Trust, there's 82% of the farmers they're working with are female. And also this added value by making products is trying to sort of tackle sort of bringing youth back to agriculture, because we're adding value. It's not just selling the fresh leafy vegetable, but also adding, developing new products, which also can obviously maintain income throughout the whole season. We had a goal, and we actually, with the CSEZA Trust, to develop robust supply chain for production to scale up for the number of smallholder farmers, and to develop a research brand for smallholder climate and resilient traditional crops. We had some funding for this, but unfortunately it was a victim of reduced international funding, but we're keen to do this, and we'll hopefully get some funding to do that again in the future. So just to summarise, hopefully I've shown you that amaranth can provide benefits to smallholder farmers, or amaranth cultivation, in terms of nutrition, livelihoods, and a climate resilient in agriculture. That these locally adapted traditional crops are understudied, but they have great potential to meet multiple sustainable development goals. And also we have to diversify the number of crops that our food system is relying on. So as climate change is leading to sort of increased extreme weather events and increased or changes in our climate, changes in disease profiles and etc., it's going to be very important to have a diversity of crops and a diversity of lines within those crops for sustainable food production. I've shown you that genome sequencing and metabolomics can significantly enhance a breeding program, but we need innovation in the whole value chain and promotion of enterprise at the end for this sort of to realise these benefits. And I also wanted to point out that innovation is not just the high-tech innovation of genomics for a new amaranth line, but we also need innovation in policy to support this type of smallholders and SME and enterprise development, relationships between different parts of the food system, and so on. And just to finally sort of say, I think it's absolutely essential to bring together different expertise and capacity. And also that policy is going to be essential in making sure we realise the benefits and preventing unwanted outcomes. You want international markets in one sense for income, but that can lead to unintended consequences, as we've seen in sort of some South American situations, where then the food becomes too expensive for local markets. So I think there's also in terms of policy, a focus on local and regional supply chains could be a huge benefit here. Okay, so just to say thank you to you for listening, and also to all the people involved in the project. So a number of Fabian Weissig in my group has been the main driver at York, and then Sonia, Ndiwe, Sydney, Willem and Michael at ARC have been fantastic partners and really driven this project a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Catherine Denby. You will get your questions after our last speaker. Thank you. Our second speaker is Dr. Michael Bairu. Dr. Bairu works for the Agricultural Research Council. He is the research team manager for plant breeding and genetic resource management. Dr. Bairu incidentally has a close working relationship already with the University of York, as you can see with Dr. Denby's presentation, and is also the recipient of a grant for multidisciplinary research on amaranth. He's also currently focused on farmer development, crop development research, and he will speak on an overview of the ARC's research on indigenous and indigenized vegetables. Over to you, Dr. Bairu.
Thank you, Yelisa. Good afternoon and good morning, colleagues, depending where you are. I think, thank you for the opportunity to speak. What I would do today is to just give you an overview and a bird's eye view of what we do, but I would encourage the audience to focus or zoom in where your interest lies. But to start with, I think we say when the reason why we say indigenized and indigenous crop is that to just avoid contentious subjects. Sometimes people take it personal when you call a crop indigenous crop, and whereas it is, for example, we talk about amaranth today, and we know it's from Latin America, but it has came in several hundred years ago, and it has become part of the culture and of the society, and in a way it has been naturalized and indigenized, and as such we recognize those crops as indigenized crops, and we would refer to them as such. What our indigenized crops research program focus at the ARC is that we largely collect, conserve, and characterize genetic resources. I think that really gives us a very good platform to work, as well as in terms of a good point of attraction for our international and local and regional partners. We focus on broadening the food base. I think we all understand, for all the riches that it has, that Africa is considered as one of the countries with a very narrow food systems. So by bringing in these indigenized and indigenous crops that are marginalized, we also intend to broaden our food base. We work towards improving food and nutrition security in a broader sense, but then we also zoom in terms of looking into very specific parameters such as plant-based protein or other health or micronutrient related focused research areas. We also work on these crops to improve climate resilience of farming systems through screening crops for drought tolerance and identifying those that could actually be adopted by farmers under rain-fed conditions. We also praise ourselves for doing a very targeted biofortified research program in terms of breeding for specific purpose. And we have also an active program that works on product development in the form of agroprocessing. How we achieve those key objectives is by having a very targeted research focus areas. We have our genetic resources management program. We have a dedicated pre-breeding and breeding programs. We have a program that deals with development of cultural practices, production systems, which we traditionally call the various agronomic practices. We have a dedicated team of experts that were specialized on identifying and characterizing, as well as developing mitigation strategies for pests and pathogens. We have systems that develop processing and product development research protocols. We do have a dedicated farmer support and training program that really is used as a channel to take our research initiatives to the farming communities. And we achieve most of what we achieve, I think, through our tried and tested approach, that is farmer participatory research. I think more than 70% of our actual field-based research, we do them under farmers' field with the involvement of participation of farmers, such that the farmers are part of the selection and standard setting processes, because as end users, I think we get them involved in terms of selection criteria. For the purpose of this specific engagement, I think I've just left those traditional vegetables, and therefore what we normally work are some of the indigenous vegetables. I think the sweet potatoes, the amaranth, cowpea, okra, cassava, kale, nightshade, kale, mustard, Pambara, taro, which is traditionally called amadumbi, corcorus, and quite a few selected medicinal plants for both food and non-food bioproducts. And we do those things through the various research areas, such as characterizing, breeding, water use efficiency, irrigation requirements, nutritional water productivity, where we determine how much value do you get for every water you use. That means you determine whether it's cost effective to really go and irrigation scheme with a particular crop. We do crop modeling, we determine fertilizer requirements, develop specific cultural practices. We have various accredited modules for very specific type of crops for these purposes. We also work a lot on rainwater harvesting systems as part of our conservation agriculture. We have analytical studies, ethnobotanical research, as well as product development and crop protection components. I think within this framework, I think today, given the short space of time that I have, I would just pick a few examples and we will deliberate on those. For most people in South Africa, I think they would know that I think sweet potato remains the ARC's flagship project. More than 90% of local sweet potato production relies on South Africa's ARC produced varieties. But with sweet potato, we don't really just do breeding. I think we cover the whole value chain from genetic resource conservation and development of nuclear material all the way to product development. We support the national production systems through a very disease certified seed systems, for which we have also trained vine enterprises in various parts of sweet potato growing regions of the country that provide certified vines for commercial sweet potato growers. We do develop cultivars based on industry needs or end product needs. We also determine certain root quality traits, because sweet potato selection depends on breed traits, whether you want it for mashing or for chipping, or whether you need for processing, whether you need for nutritional quality, etc., etc. So even the aesthetics, the shape, the color, all of those are part of our selection criteria when it comes to the programs. We have made quite a stride in terms of developing sweet potato products and making sweet potato as part of the rural and peri-urban livelihoods. We have learned that I think this crop can contribute a lot, not just in terms of food security, but in its nutrition security as well as economic security. We have quite a few small rural enterprises that are now making a living out of the various little trainings that they have received from the heirs in terms of making juice or confectionaries and bread and other sweet potato products such as flours and other stuff. I think what is also important with our sweet potato program is that in partnership with the Water Research Commission, we have the Water Research Commission's Water for Agriculture program. I think we have also embarked on school nutrition programs where orange flesh sweet potato, vitamin A fortified, biofortified orange flesh sweet potato is used as part of the school nutrition program. And perhaps as much as we have proven this on research scale, I think the Department of Basic Education, Health, as well as Social Development probably need to come in on a policy level to try and pick up this R&D product and roll it out on a national scale. Zooming into the next example, Amaranth, I won't go into detail because Professor Dembi kindly given us all what we do, but we have worked on Amaranth for the past 20 years at the ARC. In the process, I think we have learned a lot, and we did agronomy, whether it's participatory evaluation, as well as development of baseline information, which will enable us to undertake effective breeding. We also looked into upscaling has always been a problem in indigenous crops. So we also looked into a possibility of commercial production. We did a pilot experiment whether this crop can be commercially viable, and correctly so, I think we could prove those concepts, and scaling up production investment was what actually stopped the further advancement of this crop in terms of its value to the economy. As correctly stated by Professor Dembi, I think one of the limiting factors was the availability of amenable cultivar, as well as changing public perception, especially the perception of the private sector. But I think to alter some of those things, I think we took Amaranth to the community. For example, this is in Ngatla, KZN, where we do farming participatory research. They started with about, I think, before the BBSRC project, I think they started with about 15 or 20 cultivars, but once we have won the grant from the BBSRC GCRF funding, we have reduced those numbers to 11 cultivars or 11 lines. These were planted with farmers, and farmers then would do cooking and testing and their own consumption preferences, and they have obtained or listed 3 varieties which they currently supply to the local boxer stores. I think Dr. Dr. Dembi indicated that I think the Siaziza Trust is playing a big role in coaching and mentoring these farmers. I think we were fortunate, I think, when we went to do this participatory research, we went into a system that already existed. A trusted relationship between the farmer group and the Siaziza Trust was in place, which really allowed us to really scale this thing up. I think important to mention is that we are grateful for the BBSRC GCRF funding scheme. Through their Impact Accelerator Award, we were able to secure some funding for this group of farmers in Ngatla to establish a semi-automated traditional small-scale processing plant, which allows them to not lose products, such that if there's excess leaf product, they could blanch, dry, grind, and that dried product can actually sold on the market. As much as it's not as advanced as that in KZN, I think we have done similar stuff in Gauteng, in the Soweto. We hope to get to where we are in KZN at the moment. We have similar stuff in Mafeking, Northwest, in collaboration with our other institutional partner, the Northwest University. I think what is very interesting in Northwest is that the amaranth plant grew on average 3 to 4 times more aggressively in some of those plants than we have normally observed, which means the one aspect which we have always thought, could amaranth be competitive enough in its yield with the traditionally established leafy vegetables such as Swiss chard and spinach? I think those fears can be allayed by this kind of research-based observations, where given these are, remember, without any agricultural input, given the right agricultural inputs of irrigation, fertilization, and etc., it is possible that this crop can actually compete from a yield on yield per tonnage basis with established leafy vegetables. Yes, I think to just re-emphasize what Professor Dembe stated, I think the processing part, we did have some ground baseline information. I think what is missing now is how do we really upscale those things? How do we de-risk these technologies? Who do we partner with in terms of getting this thing up and running? We have developed them. I think the Nala Morocco bed you see was, I think, the second prize winner with our innovation hub innovation competition within South Africa. But that is where we stand at the moment. I think the uptake and rolling out of the technology and the supporting systems remains on still an infant phase. I think similar thing can be said. I think we're also grateful for the Department of Science and Innovation, who continuously support the ARC to develop such similar innovations. For example, the picture you see at the bottom is for a moringa project in Limpopo for drying and semi-commercial processing of those products. Another crop we are working aggressively on is the cassava. I think this is a relatively new addition to the ARC portfolio, but it's fast becoming one of our most popular research products. And the reason is because we put certain value proposition of the crop. For those of you who know cassava, I think it is done, it's a crop that is a very good candidate for import substitution for the starch industry. Climate resilience, we have spoken about it. I think it's a thematic area of this collaboration as well. So this is the one crop you could really alleviate a lot of climate resilience or climate change related problems, both for food and industrial application. This is also a crop that can easily be used as a household food security crop. In most part of Africa and Asia, it is regarded as the food bank, because from the day it attained its maturity, it gives you up to 18 months of storage time in the soil without losing any quality, which means you don't need all those cold chain and production and storage technologies to have a good use of this crop. The product diversity is another important strength, which is food, feed, and industry application. Given all of that, I think this crop gives you superior economic return for any unit input you give it, whether it's water, land, or other production inputs. So this is why we believe that if we really invest in this crop, by freeing up quite a lot of starch staples such as potato, maize, and wheat, I think it could contribute a lot to our national food price inflation in terms of getting the price not hiking. I'll just, out of interest, I think these are some of the products that one can look into when you think of cassava. You have plain products or semi-processed products, we can ferment or unfermented products. You cannot really throw anything off this crop. Whatever, once you have taken what is economically high value, whatever left can actually be converted into biofuels and other uses as well. Where are we with this crop at the moment? I think we have
1 minute, Michael.
Yes, we have did some ground truthing on the crop, so we know how it's important. We have done multi-location evaluation trials. We know our candidate products. Our farmers are ready. They have been informed about the crop. So we hope that, I think, given the investment, I think where we stuck now is I think we couldn't establish the seed system because of financial constraints. So currently we are exploring opportunities to establish the seed system and then get this crop off the ground. Equally important, I think, is the cowpea, Pambara, and groundnut. These are purely for alternative protein as well as other high density vitamins, nutrition, especially health, sugar metabolism related things. I think by conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I think within the indigenous and indigenized crops space, what is the challenge we have is the visible gap within policy priorities when it comes to funding, relative to how much money goes into the R&D of, say, beef or wheat or maize or potato. You cannot really say there is any money, especially within the South African context, that goes into these indigenized crops. So we hope that this type of conversations we have and the findings we have would alleviate those problems. We have also learned that the kind of collaboration that you have seen, Professor Denby's first slide, how much global reach this collaboration had, and that really allowed us to pull so much resources together, and the value of such vast collaboration should not be underestimated. I think that's the right path. We need to harness those kind of approaches. We need to talk about our food culture, public perception, and the relative reduced appetites of the private sector are some of the hindrances for the uptake of these technologies. Perhaps I think we also need to work when Professor Dembe said innovation is not only science. I think we need to have some innovative ways of breaking these barriers so that these commodities can reach the global public. Good research is often not followed with investment. I think that was also the concluding statement by Professor Dembe. Yes, we have done a very nice set of results. Our 3-year is finished. We have a whole lot of data setting. So where to from here? Do we just stop there, or how can we have the sustainability of our R&D while we also push in R&D products into the economic sector, the agricultural sector? So my last question to our audience and participants is that what is the way forward to harness R&D outputs such that we ensure food and nutrition security, availability, options, innovative product development, and et cetera, all the good things that come out of research? How do we harness and make them sustainable such that our research doesn't become shelved in our various publications and reports? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. We'll keep those questions in mind as well. Our third speaker is Professor Albert Mody. Professor Mody has established and currently directs a Center for Transformative Agricultural and Food Systems based at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Professor Mody also teaches and does research in crop sciences at the university. He has since supervised about 60 postgraduate students with a record of more than 150 journal and peer-reviewed conference proceedings and book chapters. Over to you, Prof. Mody.
Thank you very much. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, it's a great honor to be invited to this important event. I know people have been enjoying science for the past 3 days. I'd like to thank Bob for a very good introduction. Both Mike and Kathy actually spoke to you about science. I'm going to be sort of biased in that I will be also sharing some sort of social perspectives of agriculture, particularly from the perspective of indigenous knowledge systems. In the position that I occupy as a researcher, but I also occupy a management position at the university, one of the big questions that we ask ourselves as universities is the question of the relevance of our curriculum, given the challenges of today. I mean, there are two major challenges. One of them is how to adapt to the challenges of climate change and responding to the sustainable development goals. But in South Africa, we've got a serious challenge of employability of our graduates. So we need to look for opportunities, particularly those that are going to be homegrown for our students to study and do research in areas where employability is going to be a potential and viable. So just to add to some of the comments that were made, particularly by Mike, making the case for indigenous knowledge systems. The question that people always ask is whether there is a role for indigenous and traditional knowledge. You know, a lot of the science that we learn, whether it's agricultural science, environmental science, biological sciences, etc., is largely based on what was designed overseas, mainly in Europe. And so we basically learn this, and after learning it, as we move forward from one generation to another, we realize that there's a lot of indigenous knowledge that is left behind, and it does not contribute as it should to science in particular, but also to things like psychology, philosophy, even politics. So it's very important for the leadership of universities in particular to ask a question of whether or not there are some answers that can be derived from indigenous knowledge systems. So this is a very important question for us, particularly also in the context of resolving some of the socioeconomic issues. So in the context of my presentation, regarding the water, energy, food nexus, the connection between water, energy, and food. I mean, this is something that people have been talking about for a long time, and it has got great opportunities for research. And that research could then lead to us coming up with new curricula related to climate change, as well as the social issues that need to be addressed as a result of the relevant curriculum. So you can see here that this illustration emphasizes climate change and social change. But if you look at the water, energy, and food, where we are interested in is what is the relevance of water for energy, the relevance of water for food, the relevance of food for energy, and the connection between energy and food. If you just ask these questions, you can come up with many, many theses from many different perspectives, including both sciences and humanities. So the question then currently among the people who are doing research in water-related areas is what is the relevance of the water footprint? Now, water footprint can be looked at from different perspectives, but in agriculture, we look at it in the context of the water that is required to grow a crop, and how much water does a crop need, and how much water is going to be used from the time that you grow that crop to the time that that crop is taken from one part of the country to another, from one part of the world to another, the processing that is going to be involved in all of that. And so the extent of water use in relation to consumption by people is the bigger picture. People who have done a lot of work on the question of water footprint have identified the three types of water footprints. And they talk about the green water footprint, the blue water footprint, and the gray water footprint. And all of these are influenced by what is happening in the climate zone of agriculture, the crop parameters, in other words, the environmental zone, the crop which is going to be responding to the environment, as well as the management systems, particularly irrigation and fertilization. All of these influence what is going to end up being a measurable green water, blue water, or gray water footprint. And so we need to come up with ways in which to manage the system in order to increase the crop yields that is going to be linked to less water use by the crops. And so the question would be then, whether or not the crops that dominate the food system, such as maize, rice, wheat, are going to respond very easily to this. I mean, they've been manipulated through genetic manipulation and so on to not be able to grow without a lot of assistance through irrigation, fertilization, and so on. Now, as a result of that, we thought it is possible to find relatives of wild edible plants among those crops that are already cultivated. My colleagues talked about some of them, amaranthus and others. And you can see that the water use or the water use efficiency of some of these crops is actually much lower. The amount of water that is used for production is much lower than those that are dominating the food chain. And again, other opportunities for research. And so people can do a lot of research looking at all of these crops. For example, the optimal water required to grow a crop can be measured using a very simple formula of ETC equals KC times ETO, where we know that KC is the crop coefficient value, ETO, the reference evapotranspiration, and ETC, the crop evapotranspiration. If you talk to people in the rural areas, it's amazing when you go to the rural areas that they will tell you what this is in different ways. And once you know what this is, then you can monitor the growth of a crop from the beginning of the season to the end of the season and identify the time of the year when the crop will be using more or less water. Now, this can be done, as Mike said, by going to the different parts of South Africa. Now, if you look at agricultural land use in South Africa, you will see, looking at the different provinces, what is actually happening as far as agriculture is concerned. But what I wanted to focus upon in the context of my presentation is subsistence agriculture. Where does it happen? I mean, this is the Eastern Cape, right? I come from this part of the world, almost right here. This is where my home is. And all I know is subsistence farming. There is no commercial farmer there that is growing maize like what I see in, for example, KwaZulu-Natal and the Free State. And the poverty that you find in the Eastern Cape compared to any other part of the world is amazing. And it makes people move from the Eastern Cape to Gauteng, Western Cape, etc. What is it that we can do in order to change the situation? There's a lot of work that has been done elsewhere in Southern Africa that shows, including Asia, that shows that intensive subsistence farming has got a lot of advantages. It is, of course, I got a high yields per unit area. It's highly efficient. It is low on environmental impact. It has got intensive human labor, but it is high in terms of producing high quality seeds, and fertilizers can be used very efficiently. And in fact, you can even do organic farming. Now, these are some of the pictures that I took myself, some of them closer to my home, some of them in KwaZulu-Natal, etc. And one of the things that has happened over time in the rural areas, particularly of the Eastern Cape, is the degradation of the environment as a result of what people converted to as the so-called better agricultural methods compared to the traditional systems, and the land has actually been degraded. But these people still have a chance. In their small areas of land, we can actually make them grow maize. You can see here there's a domination of maize because people think that this is the most important crop. But if you look at their system as a whole, you can actually have a very successful organic farming under dry land conditions. Goats, for example, this is every home where I come from in the rural areas has got goats. But you go to supermarkets, and ask yourself, have you found goat meat? No, you don't find goat meat. You find meat of lamb and beef. We can change the situation and make this a commercial entity, and you combine the whole system, we can come up, for example, with organic farming. So these are some of the characteristics of traditional crops that people tell us about. I mean, this is a publication that I did a long time ago, 2003, and people identified these as some of the characteristics of traditional crops: nutritious, safe food, inexpensive, it's got less diseases. And when people did research, here's a research that was done a long time ago. It's nothing new by the Medical Research Council in Tygerberg, showing the value of some of the crops, the plants and crops that are used by people in the rural areas. They are not cultivated, many of them, as Kathy said, Amaranthus is not cultivated. These are the local names for different crops that different plants that are used as wild edible plants in the rural areas. But you go to many people in the rural areas and ask them about the crop that they use, the vegetable that they use. Many of them use cabbage, right? And they take a taxi to the urban areas to buy cabbage. And many of them have been told that these indigenous vegetables or wild plants are not good for you. Look, I mean, you are observing my presentation now. How does cabbage compare to many of these things? I mean, look at iron and ask yourself, are you a woman? If you're sitting here in the audience, as your doctor told you something about iron? Well, look at zinc. I don't want to say anything about COVID-19 and zinc because the scientists are gonna kill me, but zinc is very important for your immune system. Again, look at cabbage here and you look at it compared to how much selenium is in these crops, okay? Now, a lot of research has been done. I showed you research that was done by Medical Research Council in Tigerberg. Look at this. This is a wild edible plant. Many people don't even know it, okay? And it shows you that it has got a potential not only as an edible plant, but also as a food crop. Now, at UKZN, we identified, as Michael said, some of the plants or crops that are not utilized, and we are now doing research. Pambara groundnut is one of them. We are making a proposal, we are making a proposal to KwaZulu-Natal government as well as South African government to establish the KwaZulu-Natal Small Scale Agriculture Association, where small-scale farmers are going to organize themselves in different municipalities to form an organization that would be supported to produce in an environmentally friendly way many of the crops such as cassava, amadumbe, and so on, and use these crops for production at different levels of organization by the farmers and create a value chain system for seed production, food production, all the way to the formal market. And we believe that if government supports this, we would be very successful. We've started working on this, asking some questions. Only this to indicate to you that we've got the support that is coming from government, which is a technology innovation agency. I would like to recognize their support just to start this. But we want to have Kwasa, EXA, Eastern Cape, Kwasa, and so on. Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I got too excited.
Thank you so much, Prof. That was really wonderful. Without wasting any time, I've noted that there are questions that came from the audience, and I want to get into it right away. If I may have Prof. Catherine and Dr. Baru ready for the questions from the floor. For Prof. Catherine, the main question was, what about food safety for the final product?
Okay, yeah, so I mean, that's all part of developing a robust supply chain. You know, food safety is just an integral part of that. And, you know, and ARC have got expertise in developing new products. CSZs work with other universities as well who develop new products. So it's not an area of my expertise, but I mean, it's just part of what you're doing in terms of establishing that whole value chain, and the food safety is another part of that. You have robust growing guidelines, you know, you have standards of harvesting, transport, and processing and testing of it.
Thank you so much for that, Prof. Catherine. There was a question for Michael, I think, on biofortified foods. You mentioned something also about providing food that is suitable for the school feeding scheme, right? And my question is, how early do you involve government on influencing policy on such, you know, so that your product does not wait to be part of a feeding scheme, but is while it is being developed or during the development phase, it is already being written in some important policies. I think that was the question.
Thank you. I think when I went biofortified, I think I would like the audience to make a clear distinction with fortification and biofortification, where fortification is when you add ingredients in an artificial way, like in maize meal. When you grind them, you mix iron and vitamin, whatever you add in a manually. But biofortification is a natural way of enhancing nutrition through breeding without any involving chemical use or GM technology, without using any of those complex processes. I think it's just breeding a high nutrient crop with a low nutrient crop, and then you hope that I think that is the best example is the orange flake sweet potato example that was bred to address vitamin A deficiency in children. We know that is one of the biggest problems in sub-Saharan Africa, especially when it comes to child days and development and even visual health itself. We see lots and lots of children these days putting glasses from such a young age, and most of those are attributed to those things. So I think we, as ARC, we were fortunate enough that to answer your question indirectly, I think even when we embarked on this journey, we embarked with government. The then Department of Rural Development and Land Reform was on board with us in terms of developing those high vitamin A biofortified sweet potato cultivars. And subsequently, even when we rolled those technologies to farmers, they were the vehicle and the funders of the trials, even the establishment of the vine nurseries, the establishment of the rural enterprises for the production of sweet potato flowers and those bakery technologies. All the training that went underneath, I think, was funded by the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform. So yes, I think we involved in that. Is why I said now that we are at the stage where this needs to be upscaled. As indicated, I think development research has never been a problem. I think South Africa is blessed with a wonderful science system that produces amazing knowledge. I think where the challenge is, once the knowledge and the technologies are developed, do we have the systems to really push them so that society can benefit from them? That's why I say that I think probably the Department of Health, Social Development, because the school nutrition program, as we all know, is under the Social Development Department. Therefore, it is not within the agriculture mandate. So that is why I think those now sister departments need to step in and make use of those technologies that are available. I think that is, but we did do with the school nutrition program as a pilot project to see, even there's also an example that is done on cassava in Kenya. They have developed a yellow cassava to essentially address vitamin A deficiency for the school for school children. So I think that is how the whole thing unfolded. I hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Michael. Another question for Prof. Mody. How flexible is academia on changing or adapting the curriculum to meet the pressing needs or the present needs, for example, climate change or some of the issues that you have mentioned yourself? How flexible is academia in adapting their curriculum?
Well, academia is very flexible. The best approach that we use is to speak to organizations such as ARC, for example, as well as the industry, okay? Because the industry is the one that is going to be using the products. So there's a drive, particularly in transformed universities, to speak to the industry as well as organizations such as the ARC when we design our curriculum in agriculture, for example, in biology, in plant breeding. And we collaborate a lot in our work with people who are coming from ARC as well as people who are coming from industry, so that our students are doing something that is going to be responding to the needs of the industry. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Prof. Mody. I have a question here from Belinda Morris. She says, what do you see as the best way to support the increasing use of traditional crops for smallholder farmers' economic development? I suppose that will be for both Catherine, Michael. Maybe start with you, and then we'll go to Prof. Mody.
Okay, yeah, so yeah, I think I think there's 4 things, and I don't want to steal everyone's thunder. So, I mean, I think Michael raised really critical points about food culture and public perception of these foods. I think the other area is around promotion of enterprise, private sector enterprise around these traditional crops.
Yes.
My third one would be promoting research, well, funding that isn't just in research organizations like Albert was just talking about, working with industry, but also working with the civic society organizations, NGOs, working across and co-production of that research. So not just sort of it going on in the research organizations with input, but actual funding mechanisms that can go across disciplines and across organizations. And then I think the last thing, though I suppose maybe the best was supposed to be one, is what Albert also sort of was talking about, is this regional food system. I mean, I think his approach in KwaZulu-Natal is really fantastic, and that's got to be sort of replicated, that these regional food systems with diversity of crops and setting up regional and short supply chains like that. Sorry, that's my 4. Michael.
Yes.
Yes, I think, well, I have to add 1 or 2 on that one. I think equally important to what Catherine said is, I think the establishment of an effective seed system is one of the biggest challenge in South Africa now. If you were to really package the seed of these indigenous crops like a fancy packets that you see in or the other established vegetables and sell them in the big supermarkets, and they will be trending, and then we like fashion like as people. So I think that is one aspect. The other aspect is, I think, also in terms of getting the technology off the ground, how do you really partner? I will give you an example. We did in March this year for sweet potato. I think we teamed up with McCain, this International Potato Center, SIP, I think SunBio, NEPAD, CSIR, and Sinovatec, an American processing company that is specialized in making of sweet potato puree that has a shelf life of more than 18 months. I think that is to totally stop wastage. It literally converts any sweet potato, doesn't really have preference for shape and size and etc. So when you bring those various stakeholders together and create the value chain, that is what happened. I think in line with that, what we are trying to do now for sweet potato, to answer your question was example is that we have submitted a proposal to the Department of Science and Innovation to really de-risk all of that technology that has been done and the plan that we put forward, so that the next step would be to bring in the various sector role players around the table and get things on the ground. And that is the second aspect. The last aspect, I think I would like to really emphasize to what Professor Mody said. The one fundamental mistake within the agriculture system in South Africa is that we always tend to think big. I think bigger is not always better. I think there are several incidences where bigger can be disaster. So lack of investment on smallholder farming development and intensive farming is a big challenge. So often we undermine and we forget that more than 75% of the world food supply comes from smallholder farmers. So most of us think that it's a commercial farmers that is feeding the world. It is absolutely not. So the lack of investment in intensive smallholder farmer agriculture in South Africa, and our tendency to try and graduate commercial farmers and put a lot of money to try and get a few commercial black farmers and etc. Those are a skewed policy, in my opinion, that we need to get away with. Thank you.
Thank you. What do you think, Prof. Mody? In addition to what you've already said.
I mean, they've almost covered everything, and I totally agree with what they say. Just to emphasize the need to redefine the food chain, the agricultural food chain. If you redefine the agricultural food chain, you now social sciences. We need to educate people about these crops. We need to make people participate in the value chain, pre-production, production, post-harvest, and so on. And if you do that, you'll popularize them inadvertently without spending even a lot of money.
Yes.
A lot of food that can be produced using these crops would be safe food, believe it or not. That's one thing. It's very safe. You can produce it just using organic farming, small areas of land, safe food, high in nutrients, okay? Unlike many of the crops that come in large quantities where I have to use lots of fertilizer and herbicides and so on to produce them, these would be very safe. And we've got a generation wide now that wants things to be safe, and technology must be combined with whatever you do. To me, those are some of the things that we need to look at. Yeah.
Yeah. I think just the last question to both you, Prof. Mody, and Michael, especially who mentioned cassava. There is, I did not find an emphasis on sustainable production methods like conservation agriculture. I know it's not something that is practiced as much, but should be, you know, at least be mentioned with every crop or every breeding program. How do you merge those two to ensure that the sustainable production of food? I'll start with you, Prof.
I was going to say start with Michael. You know, sustainable agriculture has got many dimensions. The advantage of many of these crops is very short season. Okay. Through plant breeding, for example, we could have, let's say maize is a major crop. It's going to take a long time for you to tell people not to grow maize. It's part of life. This is the season. Now go to the rural areas. Everybody is planting maize, right? But imagine if plant breeders could come up with a maize crop that would be able to tolerate that competition with so-called weeds in the first few weeks. 4 weeks is enough to grow some of these things. And in the first 4 weeks, you don't weed at all. You're not going to be spraying, but you're actually growing a weed that is going to be removed and taken to the market. And then after that, the maize will grow without it being affected. That would be my thesis proposal for a master's degree. You could actually do a very interesting study there from a statistical perspective, a crop response to environment perspective, but of course a plant breeder would test different varieties of maize, for example, that would compete very well at early stages of crop development.
Michael, the reason I mentioned conservation agriculture is cassava, deep rooting and, you know, extreme soil disturbance. How do you plan to push forward with this particular crop while others are pushing for minimal disturbance, minimal soil disturbance? Are you breeding less deep rooting cultivars or something along those lines?
Thank you. I think I would like to start answering your question by making some analogy. You know, when you are confronted with two devils, you are forced to choose the better one, whether you like it or not. South Africa is a water deficient country, and with the climate change, I think I cannot see with the current water use, the current volume of water we use, our catchment is not getting bigger, it's getting smaller because of expansion, urbanization. Our water rainfall frequency is not improving because of the climate effect. We're going to have very few rains that are erratic, that are going to cause more problem than solution. And therefore, I don't really see our maize, potato, and other big staple continue to support the growing population in South Africa in terms of providing what is required. That is on the one hand. On the other hand, you have crops such as cassava. You could probably get away with 1 or 2 rain during a rainfall season, and you could really plant them with close to, with cassava, it's like a saving account. You know, if you put more, you get more. If you don't put more, you still get, but you get something less. So, for example, if you grow cassava without any agricultural input, you are likely to get between 25 to 30 tons per hectare. Give the treatment or half the treatment, even a quarter of the treatment that you give cassava, that the treatment that you give to potato, you are likely to get upward of 100,000 or 100 tons per hectare. So the other day, I think we were sitting with Professor Mark Lane at UKZN and we were doing some number games. And if you were to do poultry feed, for example, from 1 hectare, you are going to get about 4 to maximum 5 tons of maize. 1 hectare of cassava is going to give you, if you do it properly, is going to give you more than 80 tons output. So literally your economics of scale is not even there for comparison. So I think that is why the balance, that is on the one hand. To answer your question on the conservation agriculture is that on cassava science has advanced. I think currently we are in the process of importing fast growing 9 months cultivars from the international research institutions, both in Latin America and IITA. So the cultivars we currently have, most of them are 18 months long growing cultivars. But once we get the short growers, we should also be able to compensate for some of the conservation agriculture related challenges that you put in. I think the other aspect is also that you don't have to really with cassava, I think you have much less soil disturbance than you do with maize and potato. So if you compare cassava with maize and potato, purely on the basis of conservation agriculture, I'm sure cassava is not going to come out worse than the other 2 crops. So this is a crop that you could just uproot and without using any mechanization for harvesting, like we see it in the South African agriculture and etc. with potatoes. So I think that way, I think we could really choose a better devil and really mitigate problems while we also develop solutions with them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you to all the speakers and the listeners. We really enjoyed this session. Now I'll call upon Dr. Maneshri Jagmonaidu from the Department of Science and Innovation to do the closing. Once again, thank you so much. Over to you, Maneshri.
Good afternoon, everyone. I actually have a very huge task at hand because I think the discussions were exceptionally rich. We started off with Prof. Bob Doherty setting the scene in terms of what are our objectives with this program in terms of enhanced nutrition security, climate resilience, and supporting smallholder farmers. And I think in the presentations that came, the discussions were exceptionally rich, particularly in highlighting what are some of these crops around amaranth, sweet potato, cassava, and what's been done, particularly first from the science perspective, with identifying what is the genetic basis for informing crops that then have climate resilience, looking at what are the nutritional values, looking at the science behind what informs the traits that we then put into new cultivars that are then being used by the smallholder farmers. And I think that is particularly critical in some of the presentations that came out. And we didn't just go to the science of developing the cultivars. We looked in terms of the processing. I think on the Amaranth side, in the collaboration between N8 and the ARC, the issues of drying and grinding. I think Prof. Mody then went on further to say, in terms of some of these nutritional crops and these traditional crops, what else are we supposed to be doing with ensuring that we are supporting water use efficiency? There were in the question box issues around how are we supporting sustainable production, and water use efficiency was also key on this. But also, I think we had a lot of exceptional examples on what are some of these key crops? What are the alternative areas in terms of subsistence farming? So in putting all of this and over and above that, what more should we be doing in terms of biofortification? So I think on sweet potato, we then also looked at, in terms of the science, how should we be enhancing nutrition through breeding? So I think, and key in this in terms of increasing then smallholder farmers to use indigenous, underutilized and traditional crops, it's key issues where promotion of enterprises, promoting funding, looking at how we are regional, and I think we've also extended this to global collaborations and looking at diversifying crops around that. The use of effective seed systems, but also establishing markets and creating sustainable value chains, I think came up key. So not only on the production side, but on the post-harvest. And I think from the chat, we also had a lot of discussion around what are some of the other issues, food safety, also looking at what are some of the key issues that then are also necessary in terms of, I'm looking for my notes here, and then looking at seed systems, looking at, and the other question was around, so I've covered food safety, seed systems, biofortification, and these become, and then climate resilience. These become some of the key building blocks that contribute to how we could enrich the work that we are doing on nutrition security. But I think a lot of the issues then that came up also looked at, and although this wasn't specifically mentioned, I want to raise it here because all of these are interlinked. So yes, SDG goal 2 in terms of ending hunger and malnutrition, SDG 1 in terms of ending poverty, because there's no economic resilience if you cannot support smallholders to also come out of poverty, and that's SDG 1. The issue of global partnerships, I think, is also critical, SDG 10, and I think the N8 South African collaboration on this also ticks that box. In terms of water use efficiency and clean water and sanitation, we also talked a lot about the water use efficiency. So these become critical contributors to building a sustainable program and around food and nutrition security and informing the priorities that we could take forward in terms of the collaboration with N8 and the Agri-Food Systems and Policy Hub. Now, I don't think I could, in the summary, cover all the detailed aspects, but I think it really spells it out in terms and lays a foundation for the next steps in terms of taking this collaboration forward. I want to perhaps also then, in terms of our agricultural priorities, in terms of the Department of Science and Innovation decadal plan and the draft decadal plan that puts agriculture at the forefront in terms of modernizing sectors, but within that, it's modernizing the sector for increased resilience, for responding to climate change, and secondly, and lastly, responding to the use of technology to make sure that we also support farmers to become part of the formal economy, looking at how we can support them to become transformed, and particularly looking at nutrition security, which cannot be considered. You cannot talk of biofortification without looking at nutrition security. You cannot talk of nutrition security without looking at developing farmers. So development is interchangeable then with food security. And before we start to even talk about then digital technology to actually assist and enhance what we then do in changing the paradigm, in making sure that we move away from the dual economy and we have more farmers that are becoming part of the formal economy, that they are contributing to GDP, and that we are transforming the sector. So with that, I want to close the session. I want to thank. Sorry, just before I do, I have a long list of people that I have to thank in my vote of thanks, who made this collaboration and discussions possible, and who will be taking this forward in the near future. So firstly, Prof. Bob Doherty, Dr. Yolisa Pakela Jazile, who's moderated for us today from the ARC, Prof. Catherine Denby from the University of New York, Dr. Michael Bairu from the ARC, Prof. Albert Mody from UKZN. And I also want to acknowledge all the people who've been working behind the scenes in organizing the event. So Antonia James from N8 Agri-Food Systems Policy Hub, Aidan Darker, Dorcas Lekanyane, and Kristen Kloser, who have also been part of the collaboration from the FCDO side, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and in my own office, Ms. Bula Matabula. So thank you to everybody, thank you to the speakers, and thank you very much to the audience for the questions and the comments. We will be open to taking further discussions and engaging other partners on this issue as we move forward. And with that, I thank everyone. Perhaps as we close, if I can ask all the speakers and all the collaborators to open their cameras and give a final goodbye to everyone. Thank you very much, everyone. We can wave.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
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 Thank you.